The Vael Imperium had exterminated 412 species. They were working on their 413th. The declaration of war was broadcast across 17 systems, translated into 9 languages, and delivered with the ceremonial gravity the Vael called the courtesy of annihilation. Humanity's response arrived 4 hours later. It was a single sentence. Noted, the Vael Imperium was old. Older than the concept of old meant anything to most species. They had built their first war fleet when humanity was still arguing about whether the Earth moved around the sun. They were not cruel. That was the part most species got wrong. Cruelty implied emotion. The Vael had none. They were efficient. They were thorough. They were the cold, patient machinery of a civilization that had perfected the art of removing things it found inconvenient. In 40,000 years of expansion, they had classified 412 species as contamination. That was their word. Not enemy, not threat, contamination. A species became contamination when the Vael decided its existence complicated the imperial architecture of the galaxy. There was no appeal, there was no negotiation. There was only the fleet, the broadcast, and then the silence where a species used to be. Admiral Corvin stood on the command deck of the Vael flagship, implacable, and watched the blue-green curve of a small planet fill his display. Earth. The humans called it Earth. It was unremarkable. One star, one world, a scattered collection of orbital platforms and colony ships that barely qualified as a spacefaring civilization. The broadcast was already prepared. Corvin had signed it personally, the way he had signed 11 before it. The language was precise. The Vael did not threaten, they informed. By authority of the Vael Imperium, the species designated human is classified as contamination. All biological, cultural, and territorial presence will be removed within 30 standard days. Resistance is acknowledged but irrelevant. The fleet activated. 47 warships moved into formation around the planet with the mechanical grace of a species that had done this 412 times. Corvin waited for the response he had always received. Panic, a distress signal. and which ones just thought they had. "No," he said. "Drink your tea." Admiral Corvin did something he had never done in 11 campaigns. He paused. The Vael did not pause. Pausing implied doubt, and doubt was a contaminant more dangerous than any species. The fleet was ready. The timeline was set. The order had been given. All that remained was the execution, the mechanical, inevitable process the Vael had refined across 412 campaigns. But Corvin paused, because something in the human silence did not match any pattern he had catalogued. He summoned his cultural analyst, a Vael named Tessa, who had spent 60 years studying the behavioral patterns of species marked for processing. Tessa arrived on the command deck with a stack of data crystals and the slightly disheveled appearance of someone who had been sleeping when summoned. "The humans," Corvin said. "Explain them." Tessa inserted the first crystal. "They are young, approximately 2 centuries of interstellar presence, limited military projection, no significant fleet engagements. They have participated in 4 regional conflicts, all minor, all resolved through a combination of negotiation and... I have read the military summary. I want the cultural one." Tessa paused. That was unusual for a Vael. She reorganized her crystals. "Humans are..." She stopped, started again. "They are not what they appear to be." "Elaborate." "Their public profile is unremarkable. Scattered colonies, modest trade, a reputation for being industrious, curious, and somewhat reckless. They build things faster than they should. They go places they are not invited. They ask questions that other species consider impolite. And their military capability? Officially, limited. Unofficially..." Tessa pulled a second crystal. "Unofficially, I cannot give you an accurate number, and that concerns me more than a large number would." Corvin's expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. "Why?" "Because every species I have studied maintained a clear distinction between their civilian and military infrastructure. Humans do not. Their cargo freighters have weapons hardpoints. Their mining ships have shield generators. Their colony transports have ECM suites. Their civilian communications network has encryption protocols that match military-grade systems. That could indicate paranoia. It could indicate that humans do not separate the concepts of civilian and military. They do not have a war footing and a peace footing. They have one footing, and they are always on it." Meanwhile, on Earth, the Vael Intelligence Network reported something it could not contextualize. Humans were watching them back, not with military sensors, not with defensive arrays, with civilian telescopes, with amateur radio arrays, with university research equipment and hobbyist satellite links, and a network of private individuals who had, without any central coordination, begun tracking every Vael ship in the system and posting the data on a public information network. The Vael fleet was being watched by a species that had been told it would be exterminated in 30 days, and the species was treating it like a spectator event. On the Human Information Network, they called it the Grid, the Vael fleet had been catalogued, classified, and assigned playful nicknames. The Implacable was listed as Big Ship Number 1. The escort destroyers were the pointy ones. The troop transports were the party buses. Someone had started a betting pool on whether the Vael would actually attack. The odds were running 3-1 against. Admiral Corvin did not know about the betting pool, but he knew something was wrong. He could feel it the way a machine feels a vibration it was not designed to detect, not as pain, not as fear, but as an input that did not match the expected parameters. He ordered a deeper scan of the human system. The results arrived in 6 hours. They were not comforting. The scan revealed 3 things. First, the human orbital platforms were not orbital platforms. They were weapons platforms. Each one had been built with a dual-purpose design: cargo handling on the surface, military systems beneath. The cargo bays contained automated targeting arrays. The docking arms concealed railgun barrels. The communications arrays were also electronic warfare suites. Second, the human colony ships were not colony ships, or rather, they were, but they were also something else. Each one carried a full-spectrum defensive arsenal, point defense systems, and what appeared to be shield technology that no human civilization should have possessed at their technological level. Third, there were more of them than the Vael had counted. A lot more. The official human fleet registry listed 47 military vessels. The scan identified 47 vessels that matched that description. It also identified 312 vessels that did not match any official classification but were, by any reasonable engineering standard, capable of combat operations. They have been building warships and calling them something else, Tessa said quietly. For how long, Corvin asked, based on the construction signatures, since before they left their home system. The implications settled over the command deck like a pressure change. Humans had never had a civilian fleet and a military fleet. They had one fleet, and they had been building it since before anyone in the galaxy thought they mattered. Day 7. The Vael fleet held position. Corvin had not given the attack order. This was unprecedented. In 412 campaigns, the Vael had never delayed an extermination beyond the initial broadcast. The process was designed to be swift, mechanical, and final. Delays introduced variables. Variables introduced uncertainty. But Corvin had requested additional intelligence, and the additional intelligence had requested additional intelligence, and now the Vael flagship was running analysis on a species that refused to behave like a species marked for death. On Earth, nothing changed. The grid reported that human manufacturing output had increased by 12% since the Vael Declaration. Not military manufacturing. Total manufacturing. Factories were producing more of everything: food, medicine, consumer goods, building materials. The human economy was not contracting in the face of annihilation. It was expanding. They are preparing for a siege, Corvin's tactical officer suggested. No, Corvin said. A siege implies they expect to be attacked. There is no indication they expect anything. Then why the increased production? Corvin stared at the display. They are not preparing for war. They are preparing for Tuesday. On day 12, Admiral Corvin sent a second transmission. This one was different. It was not a declaration. It was a question. Why are you not afraid? The human response came in 20 minutes. It was longer than the previous messages, but only slightly. We've been afraid before. It didn't help, so we stopped. Corvin read it 5 times. He called Tessa. What does that mean? Tessa studied the message. Admiral, I need to show you something. She pulled up the Human Historical Archive. It was extensive. The Vael had been collecting data on humans for 3 years before the extermination order, part of their standard pre-campaign intelligence protocol. But Tessa had gone deeper than the standard files. She had accessed the human cultural records, their histories, their stories, their art. Humans have a concept, she said. They call it existential risk. It means a threat capable of ending their species. We are that threat. No, they have been their own existential risk for centuries. Nuclear weapons, biological agents, environmental collapse, artificial intelligence. They have catalogued, debated, and prepared for dozens of scenarios in which their own extinction was the outcome. Corvin processed this. They rehearsed their own destruction. They rehearsed surviving it. Every scenario they modeled ended the same way, not with extinction, but with adaptation. They built contingency plans for their contingency plans. They created survival frameworks for scenarios that were mathematically improbable. They trained their children to think about species-level threats the way other species train their children to read. And the Vael? Tessa looked at him. You are not their first existential threat, Admiral. You are not even their most dangerous one. You are simply the most recent. On day 15, something happened that Admiral Corvin would later describe as the moment he understood. A human civilian transport approached the Vael fleet. It was alone, unarmed, no escort. It transmitted a standard civilian identification code and a single message. Just passing through, don't mind us. The Vael weapons systems tracked it. The fleet went to combat readiness. Corvin watched the small ship drift through the formation with the lazy confidence of someone walking through a park. It passed within 400 meters of the implacable, close enough to see the hull plating, close enough to count the weapon turrets. Then it continued on its way. The human pilot, whoever they were, did not change course, did not accelerate, did not transmit again. Corvin watched the ship disappear on long-range sensors. His tactical officer spoke first. Admiral, they are not afraid of us. I am aware. Should we destroy it? Corvin considered this. In 11 previous campaigns, he would not have hesitated. A civilian ship in a combat zone was a target. The Vael did not make distinctions. That was their strength. No, Corvin said. His second looked at him. Admiral, if we destroy that ship, we learn nothing. If we let it pass, we learn what they already know. Which is, Corvin turned back to the display, that we won't. On day 20, the Vael Imperium received a communication that was not meant for them. It was addressed to the fleet. It was a human broadcast, but not from any government, not from any military command. It was from the grid, the civilian network, the one with the betting pool and the ship nicknames. The message was simple. It was a schedule. It listed every Vael ship in the system. Each one was assigned a designation, a position, a weapons profile, a shield frequency, an engine signature, and a crew complement. The data was accurate, devastatingly, embarrassingly accurate. At the bottom of the schedule was a note. We've been watching you for 3 years. We've been ready for you for 10. We appreciate the practice. And below that, if you'd like to leave, the corridor is open. If you'd like to stay, we have tea. Admiral Corvin read the message. Then he read the data. Then he read the message again. 3 years. The humans had been watching the Vael for 3 years, since before the extermination order, since before the fleet mobilization, since before the Vael had even classified humanity as contamination. They had known. They had always known. And they had done nothing. Not because they were helpless, not because they were ignorant, but because the Vael were not interesting enough to warrant a response. Tessa, Corvin said. His voice was level, but something had shifted beneath it. The humans. When did they first detect us? Based on this data, before we detected them. Corvin closed his eyes. The Vael did not close their eyes. It was a human gesture, learned from centuries of cultural exchange. Corvin had never done it before, He did it now. They were never afraid, he said, not because they were brave, because they had already finished the war. When? Before it started. On day 22, the Vael fleet turned around. There was no dramatic battle, no heroic last stand, no desperate defense. There was simply a fleet that had come to exterminate a species and discovered that the species had been ready for longer than the fleet had existed. Admiral Corvin transmitted one final message before the fleet entered transit. "You are not what we expected." The human response came in 4 minutes. "You were exactly what we expected." A pause. Then a second transmission, separate from the first. It came from a different source, not the human government, not the military, from the grid, from the civilians who had been watching the Vael with telescopes and radio arrays and betting pools. It said, "Have a nice day." The Vael fleet departed human space in formation, the same 47 ships that had entered. Not one weapon fired, not one ship lost, not one human casualty. On Earth, the grid updated its betting pool. The final odds on will the Vael attack closed at 50 to 1 against. The payout was distributed. Someone used their winnings to buy a telescope. In Lahore, Yusuf poured another cup of tea. His daughter was doing homework at the kitchen table. "Baba?" "Yes?" "Why weren't you worried?" Yusuf considered this. He set down the teapot. He looked at his daughter the way he looked at most things, with the calm, unremarkable certainty of a man who had read enough history to know that the species that survived were never the ones that panicked. "Because," he said, "we've been practicing for this our whole lives. Every hurricane, every earthquake, every war, every plague. Every time someone told us the world was ending, we woke up the next morning and made breakfast." His daughter thought about this. "So we're not brave?" "We're something else," Yusuf said. "We're the species that makes breakfast after the apocalypse, and eventually the apocalypse stops coming." He handed her the teacup. "Drink your tea." Admiral Corvin filed his campaign report with the Vael Imperium. It was the first report in 412 campaigns that recommended no action. The word contamination was removed from the human file. It was replaced with a single classification: ongoing. In the classified annex, Corvin added one note. It was not written in the precise, emotionless language of the Vael military. It was written plainly, as though he had learned something from the species he had come to destroy. "Do not mistake human indifference for ignorance. They are not unaware of the danger. They have simply survived so many dangers that the concept has lost its meaning. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the fastest. They are not the most advanced. But they are the species that, when told the universe was ending, would ask what time, and then they would make tea." The Vael Imperium never classified another species as contamination. For more HFY stories, subscribe to HFY Legends. If humanity's indifference made you smile, make sure to like and subscribe. And let us know in the comments, what would you do if an alien fleet showed up tomorrow? Would you panic, or would you make tea?